If you look at civil servants, for example, the salaries of civil servants, and there are many of them. In national government, there are 1.2 million of them. If you include other civil servants, we have approximately 2 million civil servants in South Africa, and they are mostly overpaid and mostly underworked. Of government expenditure is something like 33% of GDP. So a third of total the total what we produce in the economy is spent by government. And one other obvious problem is that we have 28 million people receiving grants. So we need to go to somehow convince COSATU, for example, that their members are mostly overpaid. That is the reality, and this is the objective reality. Ideologically, it's a leftish political party. They believe in socialism. They call one another comrade, and it's developmental kind of state. And the wrong approach is to try to create jobs. That is the wrong approach. The emphasis should not be on job creation. Politicians do not understand this. They think if you keep somebody busy that you've created a job. That is not how jobs are created. That the South African state is in very, very deep trouble, and that we are going to get into even deeper trouble if we do.
Guys, another really important video. So one of my favorite economists, I really like to listen to him, Dawie Roodt, because he actually has a really firm grasp on numbers, and I really enjoy how he breaks down these numbers and bites them into tiny bits for others like us who are not really experts in economics to really understand how the economics really break down numbers in their understanding of the economy. And so he's arguing that, in this video anyway, that, a lot of government workers, what he calls civil servants, all right, that they are overpaid and they are underworked. And, something has to be done to cut that excess, because it's actually, kind of like having much more weight on this argument for the need of a VAT hike. The VAT hike now that's turning South Africa upside down. I'll be making a series of videos soon, but yesterday, on Sizwe Mpofu-Wetji's channel, he actually premiered the live altercation between the lawyers, I think the DA lawyers and I don't know if this is the Supreme Court now, but it had the whole thing with the VAT hike. I think the EFF even backed the DA or something like that. But both of them are going to court to challenge the VAT hike that should be passed. I think it should be passed on maybe the 1st of May or the 2nd of May, and to begin that deliberation. They really want to tackle that. And remember, on this channel, I've actually made a series of videos with Mandisa Mashego actually pushing that lawyers should come together to contribute to tackle that case. They even want to pull Donald Trump and Elon Musk to tackle the whole issue with the VAT hike, because the passage of the VAT hike itself, according to Helen Zille, she argues that the passage of the hike itself was problematic because it actually violated a lot of the, would I call it now, the tenet for signing up, especially these parties that joined the GNU. But the fact that I think she argued that, the passage of the bill had to pass through some bodies, but it actually skipped some of those bodies and just went ahead to pass. So the DA now is actually taking a frontal battle against it. The EFF is trying to join the the DA to also fight the VAT hike. But now the economist, experienced economics, this is the CEO of the Efficient Group, he's actually weighing in that, one of the reasons why this argument for the VAT increase is actually still lingering is because, first of all, we must understand that there are 28 million people receiving grants in South Africa, 28 million on SASSA, all right? And so the ANC somehow has to continuously create a machine to be able to generate the funds to maintain these people. Otherwise, if they stop paying the 28 million on SASSA, bro, the country might enter in conflagration anytime. He also argues that South Africa has almost 2 million civil servants who are overpaid and underworked, all right? So because of all of this, he argues that government expenditure is to the tune of 33% of South Africa's GDP. In other words, we know that the gross domestic product, GDP, is an indicator that was actually established to be able to measure the amount of goods and services that are produced within an entity or a system, all right? Now, out of the 100% of goods and services that South Africa produces and exports to the world to measure its GDP, which of course I think is still among the leading in Africa, it says that Dawie Roodt now is telling us that 33% of that GDP, is being consumed by government expenditure. So salaries of civil servants, SASSA, and all of those things are consuming 33% of the GDP. All right. So you can imagine if that 33% was channeled into some other sectors of economy like job creation and all growth, we will not be having this fight of 33% unemployment rate. And many of the complaints I see a lot on these comments you guys actually put here on this channel, really shocking comment. So he actually argues that there has to be a way, that this is the objective reality of South Africa, that there has to be a way, to allow COSATU members somehow realize that they're being overpaid, and that South Africa is actually in deep trouble, and is actually going to be even in deeper trouble, because any attempt now to abruptly take away the whole grant system, probably the 28 million out of 60 million that are actually dependent on the government, they are to take away another 2 million who are actually civil servants, whose daily living and all of that depends on the salaries they get from the government. Bro, if all of that is taken away abruptly, it's going to be a lot of mess. But if it still stays there, it's also a mess. So South Africa is actually in a really deep, dilemma where wisdom is really needed to be able to start straightening out. So it's really blasting and really correcting some things about this whole thing with, government expenditure. He actually argues that, the civil servants probably are too much and they're really overpaid. Let's just quickly listen to Dawie Roodt break down these issues, because it's really important for us to really understand, so that we can understand the basis for the fight against the VAT hike in South Africa, and what probably the next government or the government of national unity should be doing to help, reduce this so-called bloated government spending that is actually eating up to 33% of the GDP in South Africa. And share your thoughts in the comments.
Morning. Well, the DA and the EFF in court today arguing against the decision by the Finance Minister, to raise VAT by 0.5 percentage points. As you know, this has led to a huge argument about where and how government should raise taxes. Chief Economist at the Efficient Group, Dawie Roodt, joins me now to talk more about this. Dawie, good morning. We are seeing a big argument in court today about where tax should come from, what should go up. We're not really having a conversation about how government money is being spent. Is government spending its money efficiently at the moment?
Good morning to you. Well, that should be the conversation. Where money is actually being spent. The money is very badly spent in South Africa by the South African government, and I can give you all sort of numbers. Just to give you a ballpark figure, a government expenditure, and when I talk about government, I talk about the national government, what the Minister of Finance is responsible for. But government expenditure is something like 33% of GDP. So a third of total, what we produce in the economy is spent by government. And of course, they take it out of the economy by way of various taxes. If you analyze the efficiency of this expenditure, for example, education is the biggest expense item of the Minister of Finance, but education is not only badly spent, but we spend more money on education than most countries in the world. But the quality of South Africa's education is really, really horrible, sometimes the worst in the world. So that's only one example. There are many other examples. If you look at civil servants, for example, the salaries of civil servants, and there are many of them. In national government, there are 1.2 million of them. If you include other civil servants, we have approximately 2 million civil servants in South Africa, and they are mostly overpaid and mostly underworked. Of course, not all of them. So without a doubt, the big question here is what can we do, what can be done to improve government efficiency, because we spend a huge amount of money on the state and the whole state machinery, and this economy simply cannot keep on carrying this massive burden. And we can see that by way of the various tax collections. Taxes are under pressure because the economy is not growing, and that's why the Minister of Finance wants to increase VAT, because he wants to take more money out of the system, and the only way that he can really get more money out of the system is by increasing VAT, if he wants to get more money out of the system. But the real question should be, what can be done to spend less?
So, all of that may be true, but these are all very difficult political choices, which is why I suppose no one's made them. It's easy to say government workers are overpaid. And I remember a Gauteng transport MEC saying on the record that every single Gauteng license centre had corruption within it. And so people there wanted bigger increases and were involved in corruption. That was his view. But it's political choices you have to make. If you say to people, we're going to cut what we're paying you, they're going to say, I have a family, and they're going to organise politically. Isn't that the problem?
Exactly. That is exactly the problem. But there are other problems as well. One other obvious problem is that we have 28 million people receiving grants. And we can't stop paying grants because of the economy not growing. Many people are simply unemployed. And we as South Africans, we cannot allow other South Africans to die of hunger, for example. So that is another major problem, is that we simply have to keep on paying this huge amounts of money on social expenditure as well. But you're absolutely right. This is a political question. So we need to go to somehow convince COSATU, for example, that their members are mostly overpaid. That is the reality, and this is the objective reality. If you compare South Africa to other countries in the world, if you compare South Africa's civil servants to the private sector, there is no doubt that on average they are overpaid. But it's not only that kind of political decisions. There are some other social very important reasons as well.
So there are a lot of things going on here, and this can happen in government. I mean, it happens in any big institution. It happens in big companies too. You get inefficiencies, bureaucracies, people's salaries sort of slowly drift up, and productivity doesn't necessarily drift up in the same way. What is the best way to deal with it? I mean, Elon Musk is taking his chainsaw to the US, or that's what he claims to be doing. That's led to huge disruption in that society. I think it would be very disruptive to do something like that in hours, and you would make mistakes too. Is it better to do something quickly, or is it better to reform slowly year by year, which in fact is what the finance minister has proposed in the budget?
Well, if you're in real big trouble, and we are in deep trouble, I can tell you, because if you include the other levels of debt, like, for example, the local authorities and the state-owned enterprises, debt to GDP in South Africa is already standing at approximately 95% of GDP. But it is possible to do it quickly. A very good example is what is currently happening in Argentina. Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, he is really cutting back on state expenditure, and quite aggressively. And he's got a lot of political support. So I think what is important is what you and I are doing now. We are informing the public that the South African state is in very, very deep trouble, and that we are going to get into even deeper trouble if we do not make some changes. And the sooner we start making these changes, the less painful it's going to be, because the day is going to come, especially if there's a political force behind it, like, for example, Donald Trump, when change is going to happen very rapidly and very quickly, and then the financial markets are really going to punish us. People must know this. If we continue on this trajectory, we are heading for a financial crisis.
All of this also, I mean, we all know this, of course, Dawie, is that if you were able to get the economy to grow strongly, life would be easier for everybody. There'll be less pressure on social grants, for example. More people with more incomes, always a good thing, especially in a society like ours. We're having a big argument about, in a way, the wrong thing. I remember President Cyril Ramaphosa saying all the parties of his coalition were focused on trying to grow jobs. I'm really sorry to say this, but I don't see any evidence that that's the case.
Well, it goes back to really the ideological base of the ANC, because it's still a dominant political party. And ideologically, it's a leftish political party. They believe in socialism. They call one another comrade, and it's a developmental kind of state. And the wrong approach is to try to create jobs. That is the wrong approach. The emphasis should not be on job creation. Politicians do not understand this. They think if you keep somebody busy that you've created a job. That is not how jobs are created. Jobs are created when the economy grow, and then jobs will look after themselves. And unfortunately, the kind of macroeconomic policies that we have are things like, for example, the NHI or expropriation and many other examples. And those things are bad for economic growth. So our political leaders, like I've said, they are ideologically preconditioned to make certain decisions, and those decisions are bad for economic growth. So I'm afraid it's our responsibility in the end, your responsibility and mine, to tell people what is really going on, but also to try to convince people to vote for political parties that will implement the right macroeconomic policies.
Dawie Roodt, thank you. The Chief Economist at the Efficient Group.